Hey everyone, and welcome to The Explainer. I am so pumped to have you here today because we are completely unpacking a truly fascinating grassroots guide that actually grew right out of the Occupy movement. Today's Explainer is all about exploring that really intense intersection between activism and mental health. Specifically, we're going to look at the strategies these advocates developed to help people rise up and push for change without completely burning out in the process. To really set the philosophical tone of our source material, think about this incredibly powerful quote from Martin Luther King Jr. Human salvation lies in the hands of the creatively maladjusted. The authors of this guide use this statement to show exactly how they view psychological distress. To them, feeling maladjusted to a world that's fundamentally unjust, that isn't merely an illness that needs curing. Rather, it's a profound potential catalyst for real social change. So that brings us to the core text we're examining today, Mindful Occupation, Rising Up Without Burning Out. Essentially, it's a collaborative survival toolkit. It was designed by and for people on the ground, with the goal of keeping activists mentally healthy, safe, and sustainable while they're out protesting, sleeping in encampments, and challenging the status quo. Okay, let's dive into this. Here is our roadmap for today's Explainer. 1. Rising Up Without Burnout. 2. Radical Mental Health. 3. Corporate injustice. 4. Taking care of the basics. 5. Coping with stress. And finally, 6. Psychological first aid. Let's start by looking at the macro-level theories before zooming in to the micro-level actions. Section 1. Rising up, not burning out. The need for emotional support. Right off the bat, the authors identify a core problem here. Trying to change the world is incredibly stressful. Activists tend to burn out fast for a few really specific reasons. They're constantly riding these extreme emotional highs and lows. There's this sustained sense of desperation and sheer physical exhaustion. They frequently face traumatic clashes with police or government forces. And, crucially, there's a huge tendency to just completely ignore personal bodily needs for the sake of the cause. So the guide warns that because the volatile nature of protesting is so intense, emotional first aid is literally just as vital as physical safety for the long-term survival of any movement. Moving on to Section 2, Defining Radical Mental Health, a New Perspective on Distress. The source outlines several pillars of this new movement. It really centers on grassroots involvement and diversity, recognizing the deep interconnectedness of all things. It highly values emotional and embodied expertise, which basically means trusting what your own body and feelings are telling you. The movement also seeks to reclaim language to reflect actual personal experience and directly challenges the dominance of traditional biopsychiatry. Ultimately, the authors believe that true well-being requires us to accept diverse mental states, totally change the language we use to describe our struggles, and actively avoid narrow definitions of what society considers normal. And this brilliantly illustrates that grassroots aesthetic and their central message. It's a raw reminder that those struggles, which often feel incredibly isolating and solitary, are actually shared, interconnected experiences. You are part of an ecosystem of support. Section 3. The Corporate Injustice Connection, Society and Sickness. The authors argue something really fascinating here. They assert that mainstream systems actually turn social and economic injustice into individual sickness. These advocates believe that psychological distress is deeply, undeniably linked to socioeconomic conditions. Think poverty, a fragmented society, or demanding low-paid work, rather than just being an individual's biological or chemical flaw. You can see that frustration clearly in action at the street level. The movement views mainstream psychological systems essentially as tools of a larger corporate structure. According to the text, this overarching structure actually profits from treating systemic, societal burdens as chronic individual illnesses that require lifelong, paid treatment. Which brings us to their definition of biopsychiatry. The source defines this as the biomedical model attributing mental health issues strictly to chemical imbalances. From the author's perspective, relying solely on chemical explanations ignores real political realities. They argue it ultimately benefits pharmaceutical corporations while silencing the totally valid distress that is naturally caused by living in an unjust world. All right, shifting gears a bit. Section 4. Taking care of the basics, the foundation of sustainable protest. Now, what's really interesting about this is how the raw DIY art hits the nail on the head. Radical change doesn't just start with megaphones and marches. It literally starts with simple, sustainable self-care routines. We're talking eating well, resting, and getting enough sleep.
Let's actually break down these basic survival tips recommended by the authors to avoid burnout in high-intensity encampments. First, they advise keeping a schedule to reduce mind clutter. You absolutely must prioritize at least 7 hours of sleep, because 7 hours versus 2, that really can make all the difference in your overall resilience. Stay hydrated. Keep that blood sugar up. Stay embodied by stretching, breathing, and limiting intoxicants. Keep up with your regular medications and herbs. And lastly, remember to play and have fun. Playfulness and laughter are presented as absolutely vital ways to heal and connect with the people around you.
Section 5. Coping with overwhelming stress. Practical tools.
So the crucial point here is 20. The source advises walking away from a stressor for exactly 20 minutes. Why 20? Because surprisingly, that is exactly how long it takes for your amygdala to settle down and for your body to physiologically exit fight or flight mode so you can actually process your thoughts and emotions rationally again.
Interpersonal conflict is bound to happen, right? So the guide strongly recommends replacing judgmental statements with mindful communication. Instead of throwing out a judgmental, "you make me feel horrible," try using a mindful I statement. "It makes me feel really horrible when you use negative name-calling." It's a simple shift, but it focuses on your personal feelings and observations rather than just lobbing blame at the other person.
Let's move to the next step and see how this builds. Taking this a step further, instead of attacking someone with, "You're being a jerk, stop it," a much more constructive approach is turning that judgment into a clearly stated need. Try, "I feel hurt when you say that." It would be helpful if you didn't. Expressing your own hurt and your own needs diffuses tension and creates way better, safer communication in a high-stress protest environment.
Finally, Section 6. Providing psychological first aid, community-led care.
The authors provide an exact sequential protocol for actively helping someone in extreme distress. Step 1 is safety. Carefully remove the person from harm's way and offer simple either-or choices to give them back a sense of control. Step 2 is comfort. Practice stress reduction like deep breathing and offer soothing contact, but, only if they explicitly consent. Step 3 is connectedness. Link the person to their friends and support networks so they don't feel isolated. And Step 4 is self-determination. Empower them by turning their care back over to them, helping them establish practical, manageable next steps they can take on their own. The old saying, "many hands make light work," is a really vital concept here. The guide strongly advocates for using community resources and verbal de-escalation as your absolute first resort when someone is in distress. They explicitly warn that immediately turning to the police or forcing hospitalization can sometimes cause further trauma, so community-led mutual aid should always be the priority. To bring our explainer to a close today, I want to share this incredibly powerful quote from the text that just perfectly summarizes their core thesis on self-preservation. Activist Kim Christoffel writes, "Try to remember that taking care of ourselves in the emotional and physical sense is a revolutionary act. We need to care for ourselves in ways we were never taught we'd have to." Which leaves us with this final provocative thought. If taking care of yourself and your community is truly a revolutionary act, how will you practice radical mental health today? Think about that as you take these concepts of interconnected community care, mindful communication, and self-preservation, and start applying them to your own life. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep learning.